Geeked Colorado. This is Julia Bilderback, and I am here with Jimmy Lee Combs at the Colorado Festival of Horror. If you are not here this weekend, you are missing out on some fun. So we're going to start off with my first question. So I've seen or heard a lot of debates this weekend about what is horror, like do you consider a certain movie horror or not. So my question for you is, how do you define horror?
Wow, that's a great question. I think what defines horror is what gets to you mentally, what stays with you is really what I feel that the definition of horror is. You watch things like The Exorcist, for example, and that movie still, to me personally, people either are scared to shitless of it or they laugh at it. Me, it still stays with me, and it freaks me out to this day when you watch it. And yeah, so when you can create something like that's memorable and gets in your psyche, that's pretty horrific. Oftentimes when I'm writing horror films and whatnot, I'm very much grounded in that kind of psychological horror, to where when you're watching this, you're like, oh, what if that happened to me? That could be me, or that could be my family in that scenario. And it's kind of that like real life horror that rings true.
Okay. And then also with that, so what do you think inspires writers to pick horror as their genre instead of romance or action? What is it that actually drives the creative side of it?
Oh, absolutely. I think with a lot of us, and you'll hear it often, it goes back to us as kids. We grew up on all the best stuff horror has to offer. The Friday the 13th franchise, Nightmare on Elm Street, Tales from the Crypt on HBO. You know, we all Phantasm. We all have our stories that got to us and captivated us. And what's kind of funny with that is, when I was a kid, you know, I would always, even in school, like 3rd, 4th grade, I would love writing horror stories. And I was allowed to watch all this stuff. So Tales from the Crypt, there was an example. There was an episode with Christopher Reeves, and he was cooking up the patrons and feeding them to the other patrons, and they're just like, oh my god, this meat is so good. And it just I really liked that segment. So I remember in school just writing a story, and I it was my rendition of it, and I called it, still remember, it was called Meat Cleaver People. And it was that same concept of just this like chef cooking up his customers and serving them to the other customers. And then, you know, you flash forward, and it just stays with you. And then when you decide you want to be a filmmaker or whatever it is, you know, you pursue the horror genre. Yeah, so that's how it was for me anyway.
So you kind of touched on it a little bit. You mentioned a whole bunch of different fandoms. But of the different fandoms, was there any that really inspired you or continues to inspire you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Definitely things like Creepshow. So many people love that. It's a horror anthology, Creepshow 1 and 2. Those inspired me to make Terror Tales, my horror anthology, and it's a love letter to those films. Other films in that genre, like Body Bags, not a lot of people know about it, but it had John Carpenter in it. That was a really, really cool one. The classics, of course, like I mentioned, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. Getting into even some of the foreign horror, like you know, Lucio Fulci stuff with Zombie, is really amazing, because you saw, especially back in the day, how like in Italy and other countries, how extreme their horror was and their gore, and they were really, you know, paving the way. And we didn't quite have that in the States. You know, the goriest kind of we got was things like, you know, Freddy Krueger, or even vanguard filmmakers like Peter Jackson with Dead Alive and Bad Taste. You know, so you would get those kind of things, which was cool. But it was really like the foreign countries that were really doing the crazy shit, especially in Asian cinema.
Oh yeah, like J-horror, I find that's really fascinating. I'm actually kind of tempted to write a book on it, just because of like just how bloody it can be at sometimes, like the battle royale and stuff.
Oh yeah,
and how it's also a lot of psychological stuff in there too. So
it is. Yeah, like Audition is another great foreign one. One that's a little on the more comical side and just way the fuck out there, Ricky O. If you guys haven't checked that out, you gotta check out Ricky O, because that it was like a 90s extreme over the top gore horror fest out of it's either Japan, Asia, I'm not sure, one of those countries, but yeah.
And then I know as part of the creative process, a lot of times when you're making things, you have to do research, be it on characters, plots, settings. How do you approach doing research for film? Absolutely.
If there was anybody out there who like monitored your Google searches, and I know they do to an extent if it's extreme enough, but I'm always like Googling stuff like Munchausen by proxy and keeping your kids sick intentionally, like all these just weird things that you're like, fuck, is anybody watching this? But you need to do it for the research of your stories. And it pays off. And I'll give you an example with Terror Tales in the by proxy segment. It revolves around a mother played by Lynn Lowry, who of course David Cronenberg shivers, and she's a cult actress. But anyways, researching that condition, you have to, so that when the audience watches it makes sense, because people, especially nowadays, are really quick to point out any little thing or any imperfection or stuff that's not factual. So what was a compliment to the by proxy segment, there's a psychologist in this segment, and she's talking to an attorney, and she's ruling out all these conditions of the Munchausen by proxy to try and defend the character who was keeping her son sick. And so we had somebody had watched the film, and they had made a random comment to me that they're like, yeah, it's like spot on, I'm in this field, and that's how it would be diagnosed, that's how it would be presented. So doing your research is a lot of fun, and it's fun. I find it a lot of fun. I wrote a western, a homage to like spaghetti westerns and things like that. The more research you do, the better, because it plays off. It pays off in the final film.
And do you work with subject matter experts a lot to help you develop some of that, like say an actual psychologist, or is it just you doing your own research?
Honestly, at this point, it has just been a lot of my own research.
Okay.
You do your Google searches, and you get like MDs writing articles and things like that on the subject matter. But you can do, like, what's great with it is if, say you're filming a cop movie, I've talked to police officers before, and kind of like, okay, how is this done? Is this how you guys would go about this procedure, or how would you arrest somebody in this situation? So there's definitely opportunities like that where you can go right to the source of somebody in that field and get the information, which I've done. But otherwise, like I said, there's just so much stuff you can get on the internet, which is nice. And then you just kind of fact check to the point where you're reading multiple sources, and you can kind of be like, okay, 2-3 doctors now are kind of having the same consensus here, and it's not just one biased opinion on the matter. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your day to let me interview you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you for tuning into Geeked Colorado. We'll see you next time.